Sewing a Jangia. In the previous session, we cut the fabric for the Jangia. We will now sew all the fabric pieces together. We will first sew a wrapped binding at the leg opening, then sew the side seam, then insert the elastic at the waist opening, and finally finish the Jangia. At the end of the session, you will be able to sew the fabric pieces together to make a Jangia. Assess the quality of the final product. Let's first familiarize with the tools and materials needed to sew the Jangia. They are cut out fabric pieces and elastic, matching thread, sewing machine, a pair of small scissors, and measuring tape. The leg opening of the Jangia can be finished with facing, binding, frills, or lace. Here, we will finish it with binding. Let us see how to sew a wrapped binding at the leg opening. First, take one of the cross pieces and fold one cut edge 1/4 inch inside. Ensure the measurement is right throughout the length of the strip to maintain quality and finish of the final product. Now press the folds flat. Repeat the same for the other cross piece also. Now bring the unfolded cross piece on top of the right side of one of the leg openings and align the cut edges. Sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the leg opening. At the point where the front and the back opening meet, called the crutch, snip the seam allowance a bit to be able to sew around the corner. Be careful not to pull the cross piece and also keep the seam allowance to 1/4 inch throughout the sewing. Repeat the same for the other leg opening also. Check the measurements after sewing to ensure quality. Now, press the seam open by folding the cross piece over towards the seam as shown here. Bring the folded edge of the cross piece to the wrong side, aligning with the previous seam. Press along the fold. Now top stitch next to the folded edge of the cross piece. It is helpful to hold the cross piece down with a pin while sewing, but be careful to remove the pin when close to the machine needle. Repeat the same steps for binding the other leg opening also. On the front side, it shows equally a top stitch if it was placed right on the other side. This is a wrap binding. It looks the same on the right side and the wrong side. We will now see how to sew the side seam with the flat fell seam. For this, fold the piece at the crutch with the wrong side outside and align the side seams. Sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting and ending with reverse stitch on both sides. We will sew the sides with a flat fell seam to give a clean finish to the jangia outside as well as inside. With the back up and wrong side out, trim the seam allowance of the back piece only to 1/4 inch on both sides. Make a slit at the curve on both sides to get a smooth curve on the right side. On one side, fold the wider seam allowance over the shorter seam allowance, aligning with the previous seam. Now, open the front and back piece and then fold and press the seam allowance towards the back piece. Top stitch along the folded seam allowance, starting and ending with a reverse stitch on both sides. Repeat the same for the other side seam also. Now, our side seams with flat fell seam is ready. Now let us see how to make the casing at the waist. While drafting, we added 1 inch for the casing at the waist. Whatever measurements you have taken while drafting, always relate to the same while sewing. Fold the cut edge at the waist 1/4 inch towards the wrong side of the fabric and press all around. Then measure 3 by 4 inches from this folded edge and fold it over a second time towards the wrong side of the fabric. Sew at one side seam, starting and ending with a reverse stitch all around the waist, but end about ½ inch before the point of starting. This makes a small opening to insert the elastic. Now, let's see how to insert the elastic into the casing. For this, we can pin a safety pin to one end of the elastic and insert through the ½ inch gap we made earlier inside the casing. Guide the safety pin with the elastic through the casing. Meanwhile, hold on to the other end of the elastic to make sure it does not slip inside the casing. After exiting the safety pin with elastic, remove the pin. Hold on tight to the two elastic ends to prevent neither of them slipping inside the casing. Bring one elastic end over the other, overlapping ½ inch, and sew them together, going back and forth. Now, you can let go of the elastic and help it to slip inside the casing. Arrange the gathers evenly around the waist of the jangia. We will now iron the Jangia to give it a professional and neat look. Our Jangia is now ready. It is very important to verify the various aspects of quality of the finished product. So, let's do a quality check to ensure that our product is of good quality. First of all, check if the waist circumference of the final product matches with the measurements that you have taken. Check if the seams are evenly distributed and the seam allowance are parallel. Verify if the seam pattern of the machine is right by checking if the stitches made on the right side and the wrong side of the fabric are the same. Ensure the hem and the seam are joined without corners. Check if the top stitch at the fold is neat and is close to the fold. Verify if the back stitch is clean and only 2 or 3 lines are on top of another. Finally, see if the product has been ironed properly. In this session, we have learnt how to sew the fabric pieces for a Jangia. Before we conclude, let's take a look at the key steps involved in sewing the Jangia. Step 1. Finish the leg openings of the Jangia using binding. Step 2. Sew the side seams with a flat fell seam. Step 3. Make the casing for the Jangia. Step 4. Insert the elastic to the casing and sew the ends of the elastic in an overlap and arrange the gathers evenly around the waist. Step 5. Do a quality check on the finished product. With that, we've come to the end of this session.